So before we get started, a bit about me and my background. I'm a physician entrepreneur, did my residency in clinical pathology at UCSF. I have a background in infectious disease, genetics, women's health, and now metabolic health. And I've started a company called Color Health that you may have heard of. Most recently, they've done a bunch of work in COVID testing and several other companies before joining Levels now as the head of research. Now, let me share my screen and we will talk about research at Levels. So we started 2 years ago. This was actually before I joined. We started working with some of the experts in metabolic health. And we, over the course of the last couple of years, have worked with experts such as Dom D'Agostino and Terry Walls and Sarah Gottfried and Ben Bickman to enable them to further their own research and their research agendas. Those were some of the first studies that we funded as a company to really move the field of metabolic health forward. And over time, what we've realized as we've started to build out our own product and platform is that there are a variety of different types of trials that we need to conduct, different types of experiments that we need to do in order to better learn about metabolic health and to learn quickly enough to incorporate that into our product. So, some of the more, several of you asked questions about what kinds of studies we're doing right now. So some examples are, does a change in carbohydrates impact exercise performance? This is a study that we're doing with Dom D'Agostino and Philip Prince. And it's really interesting to see whether going from a low carb to a high carb diet or vice versa has any impact on exercise performance. And that data will be coming out pretty soon. Actually, very exciting work. We've partnered with folks like Whoop to enable us to combine heart rate and heart rate variability, temperature, and continuous glucose monitoring to see if that has any impact on sleep, as well as several other types of behaviors. Several of you asked questions about how we're combining the glucose data with other types of data. And we already incorporate a lot of that people provide through the Apple Health Kit. And we are also working with external folks, like I mentioned, to study that. And then the third type of research that we're doing with folks like Sarah Gottfried is looking at continued statistics or patterns that appear in the continuous glucose data to see what drives the development of things like prediabetes and other diseases and pre-disease correlations that we see. So, and that work is ongoing. That's not done yet. That should be out probably by the end of this year. And in addition to these kind of traditional academic research projects, we've really started to double down on participatory research in the form of community research. And some of you may have even participated in our most recent community experiment, as well as N of 1 and early stage research that we're actually mostly doing in-house. So we come up with hypotheses and then we'll test them on ourselves and on the team before we make them open to the community. And that helps us build a better product as well as learn about metabolic health very quickly. And so in addition to these different types of studies, we have also recently launched a major study that enables us to look at glucose dynamics in the general population. You may have seen this. This is a collaboration with Dexcom that we announced earlier this year, and will be a 50,000 person study looking at how glucose changes among people who do not have diabetes. For some context here, most of the research that's been done on continuous glucose monitoring to date has been done on people who have type 1 or type 2 diabetes. And most of those studies are 1 to 500 people. So by far, this will be the largest study that we know of that's been conducted to date on continuous glucose monitoring trends, and hopefully will help us understand how glucose changes in the general population and what things can lead to type 1 and type 2 diabetes beyond what is already known. So some current priorities we've got these set of studies that we're doing with external collaborators. We have the internal and smaller studies that we're doing, and then we have this large observational studies. within those, some of our current priorities include things like team and community experiments. So I'll talk briefly about the community experiment involving vinegar that we most recently conducted and opened up to the Levels community. For some background here, vinegar may slow the emptying of the stomach, which reduces or slows the intake of glucose from the intestines. It may also sensitize muscle cells to glucose, which can blunt a glucose spike, or it allows the muscle cells to take in that glucose more quickly, which corrects an existing spike. It may also interfere with enzymes that digest sugars in the intestine, which also slows the intake. So for these three reasons, we decided to conduct an experiment to see on our community and on ourselves, how often does does vinegar actually improve glucose for people? And so the experiment that we did is we asked everyone to pick a meal that they typically had, and it actually varied what meal people chose. But take a particular meal and eat that meal on day one without without vinegar. And on day two, take 2 tablespoons of vinegar with that same meal and see if you get an improvement in the spike that meal generates. And what we saw was roughly 50% of people who participated in the experiment saw some kind of an improvement. And I think we had almost 200 people take part in the experiment, which was fantastic. The interesting thing was, so clearly it didn't help everyone. And one of the things that seemed to indicate whether or not it would be helpful for you is whether how often you are what we call out of range. So we typically think of optimal glucose range as between 70 and 110 milligrams per deciliter. So for folks that spend less than 70% of their time in that range, this vinegar was more likely to be associated with an improvement in handling glucose. Another experiment that we're working on now is on how people's glucose responds to aerobic and exercise. And what we've seen in a bunch of people, unfortunately, I don't have graphs available here, but we've seen that for some people, when they start low-level exercise, typically this is consistent with what people call zone 2 training, where your heart rate is usually between 120 and 140 on average. You can actually see a drop in your glucose. And that may be correlated with an increase in the amount of fat that your body is burning. We're going to do some follow-up experiments to see how that correlation actually bears out with fat burning, and also to see how often this occurs for people. That could indicate that. So one of the benefits of potentially doing this type of work is that it will enable us to help you understand truly if you're in aerobic exercise. So if you're actually, for people who are athletes, that's a really important thing to understand. And we may be able to do that better with this type of experiment than with the traditional zone 2 training. The other thing that might be interesting is for folks who are trying to burn more fat or thinking about losing weight. Knowing your fat burning status might be helpful there. Now, it's way too early for us to be able to make conclusions about that, but this is an area of interest and part of the reason why we are conducting these experiments. Another area that we're focusing on is spike detection, and we had a lot of questions coming in about, what is spike detection? How does it work? What about the new versus the old score? I want to start by saying that we're really very, very much at the beginning of understanding how these impact your health. And even understanding how to classify them, what a rapid rise in your glucose really means. So I think it was about 2 months ago, we dropped the old metabolic score. And a big part of there were 2 big reasons why we dropped that. One was that it was very hard for people to understand, and therefore if they got a bad score, it was very hard for them to understand how to improve. And number 2, the score was limited. There were certain cases where it didn't function very well. And so we've adopted a new way of thinking about this, which is just looking at your spikes and how often you're spiking. So many of you that have the newer app will see this. it's a green ring, or it's a ring that's green most of the time when you're stable. And you get, these are, each one of the dots represents a 15-minute interval. When you do get a spike, the duration of that spike is marked in red. And there are pretty simple rules associated with this. The first rule is in order for a spike to be considered a spike, so in order for something to appear as red here, you have to have a 30 milligram per deciliter rise off of your baseline. So basically from the bottom to the top of this curve has to be at least 30. And typically if your curve starts here, it's from where your curve was previously up to the peak has to be at least 30. So that's the definition of a spike. The recovery from a spike, so when a spike ends, is when you drop back to below the starting point in the 1 hour window after you crossed it. So basically it's saying once you have started dropping back to your baseline, we'll convert it from a red to a green at the point where it crossed that original threshold. And then crashing, so for some folks, if they have big spikes or wild swings, they'll actually see their glucose level drop below where it started. And so we consider if you drop to 10 points below the start of the spike within 30 minutes, i.e. it's dropping fairly quickly, then we'll consider that a crash, and that shows up on your graph as well. So I thought that would be helpful to explain to people given the number of questions that people have around it. And you can learn more. There's an article that I think we'll share that goes over this in the Levels Health blog. Another area that we're interested in is identifying trends in our glucose data. And this is one of the core goals of the study that I talked about here that we launched earlier this year. A lot of people had questions about what are the optimal numbers for glucose, and we do have an article on this as well. So we'll share that. The two things that I typically remember for thinking about whether we're thinking about optimal glucose, because it's hard to remember too many things at once. The two big ones I try to remember are loosely trying to keep getting your fasting glucose to between 80 and 90, and then maintaining your glucose levels. We say in the article 70 to 120. I would say it's probably actually 70 to 110 for about 90% of the day, and trying to avoid spikes over 140, unless you're doing strenuous exercise or some other reason why you would have a major spike. But you don't want food spikes to go above 140 if you can avoid it. There are several other things that we mentioned in the article. These are also good points to keep in mind, but it's hard to remember too many things. So I really try to focus on the first two, and they encompass most of these anyway. Additionally, what we're seeing, so some of the early data from this large clinical study, which is really an observational study, which means there's no intervention that we're recommending to people. We're just watching what it is that their glucose is doing and how they're changing. What we find is that within the first couple of days after starting to use the continuous glucose monitor, people's time in range improves. So their glucose control improves simply by looking at it, because for most people, just starting to look at it is it's a prompt for you to start to make that better. And so we see that this actually, so you see kind of a trend here that goes up and down, but it's a mild trend that continues for the first 1 to 2 months that people use the continuous glucose monitor. So we're seeing that people are continuing to optimize and improve over time. This is a fairly small sample, so we're going to need to collect more data to see if this bears out in the larger trial, but it's an interesting early finding. The other two things that we have found so far is, number one, for spikes of 1 to 2 hour durations, these would be typical spikes that you see after a meal. Having those spikes occur at the same time every day reduces your overall glucose variability. So what this might suggest is that having some routine to your eating may improve your glucose control. So if you eat at the same times each day, and this is particularly true for older people. But again, these are very rough correlations that we're seeing over a small data set. So we'll have to see if these bear out over larger groups. The second one is to avoid longer spikes. So if you have spikes that last 5 to 6 hours, those seem to be the most associated with changes in your negative glucose control. So avoiding those larger spikes can really help you improve things. And so the next thing that we're interested in is how do we help people handle spikes? What are the things that you can do to improve your glucose control? One of the main things that we've been looking into so far are food swaps. So if you have a particular food or a particular meal that seems to give you a big glucose spike, thinking about things to swap it out for can be really helpful. And we talk about, not drinking your calories, low carb dessert swaps, which can be a big one, swapping out things for pasta, rice to cauliflower. There are a bunch of them. And these are actually starting to be surfaced in our app, and they'll appear more over time. We also have a fantastic blog that has a lot of information about these. So there's a ton of information that you can find from the Levels blog already on things that you can think about swapping out to improve your glucose control. The next thing is walking after you eat. We've seen for a bunch of people that just going out for a brisk walk of 20 to 30 minutes duration can really improve a big spike. To demonstrate this on myself, I ate morning pizza last week on Thursday. So I had a full leftover pizza at about 9 a.m. and not surprisingly saw a big spike of about 50 points. And then I went for a walk and dropped it all the way back down to where it started. So you can see the walk took maybe 40 minutes. So I went on a longer walk than most people might be able to do, but it doesn't take long to get that spike to start to go back down. And I think we have lots of N of 1 type experiments showing this, but we don't yet have a larger data set. So we don't know how often this helps people and how widely this phenomenon actually helps folks after they eat. Another one that seems to be helpful that we don't have much data yet on, but based on the literature, intermittent fasting can be very helpful for improving glucose control and improving your metabolic health in general. This is a situation where you may want to talk to your doctor first, depending on how labile your glucose is in general, before you get started on something like this. But intermittent fasting, which is so fasting overall is very popular, and intermittent fasting is the most popular type. And I've looked at a bunch of different studies that seem to indicate fasting more than 12 hours, ideally 13 hours or more. A bunch of people, for instance, use what they call a 16 to 8, where they fast for 16 hours and eat for 8 hours. That seems to be very popular and seems to be gaining some traction. Those types of things seem to be associated with benefits. A 12-hour fast would be, for instance, stopping or having your last bite before 8 p.m. and sleeping overnight and not eating breakfast until 8 a.m. So pretty easy to do for most people, and it can improve glucose stability. In certain cases, it can lead to lower spikes and help you drop your fasting glucose. We haven't looked at the impact on overall health, but there is a lot of literature out there. And we do have an article that we published on the benefits of fasting for metabolic health. So that's something else you can get from the website. Additional behaviors that you can think about to help you improve your glucose control and reduce the duration or size of your spikes are reducing stress. We know that chronic stress is associated with a number of adverse outcomes, which can include worse glucose control. Getting enough sleep is a big one. We know that even a few nights of sleep can increase insulin resistance or reduce your insulin sensitivity, which means your spikes might be higher or last longer. And I think those are kind of the two big ones. But we do have some articles on that as well. Casey in particular does a great job talking about the 7 things that you can do to improve your metabolic health. And I didn't have time to add this here, but maybe we can send that link out to the group as well. These are the general metabolic health tips. So before I go into the future of research and anything else, I wanted to pause, see if anybody had any questions, and kind of open up the floor.
Perfect. We got the raise hand feature. Feel free to jump on, Riza.
Yeah. So I had an interesting thought with the intermittent fasting because I've done the intermittent fasting, but what I've found is when I do, something like a 16-8, then I end up during that 8 hours spiking more because I'm cramming a bunch of food in.
Yeah.
Trying to get my calories in. And, I'm probably like, I'm not really cramming, like, I don't have to cram all the food, but I'm more likely to eat more bingey because I'm like in that little window there.
Sure.
So I'm curious if there's any data or any recommendations on like what the trade-offs are there.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big takeaway is, and this is a great point that you raise. Just because you're eating over fewer hours doesn't mean you can eat anything, right? It still makes sense to try to eat whole foods, not to eat refined carbs, to avoid things like seed oils, and some of the general recommendations matter. And I think we have a lot of information on food swaps that you can use to get healthy alternatives to, I think with my own experience, when I get hungry, particularly when I started doing intermittent fasting, I would just jump for whatever was around, right? That might be a croissant or some chips or something like that. And yeah, then you end up spiking more than you would otherwise. I think the jury's out as far as, well, what I would say is, on average, people who do intermittent fasting have better outcomes and better results than those who don't, based on what we've learned from the literature. But still, I think if you're doing intermittent fasting, that doesn't mean you shouldn't try to reduce the spikes that you have from eating. So if you are seeing that you're having high spikes, there are a lot of food swaps that you can make to reduce those.
Cool. Thanks.
Sure.
Natalie, do you want to hop up? Oh, I think you are still muted.
Can you guys see me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I just got home and I'm eating avocado. Too much multitasking today. I made a note. So I thought it was really interesting what you said about spiking at the same time every day is better than spiking different times. So it's note to self. I don't have that many spikes, but that's a good thing to know. I have two questions. You talked about the spike circle, the circle. I've never seen that, but on my thing, instead of seeing my numbers, which I actually like because I kind of got used to them, there's now this thing that just says spike, which I kind of don't know what to do about it. So I wrote a note last night. I'm like, all right, I don't know what to do with that. Can you bring my numbers back? Because at least it was telling me something, but now I just have, when you look on the month view, I just have the word spike or, whatever. And
that's weird.
And there's days where, like when I did the meal without the vinegar last week, it was like through the roof and stayed up there forever. And then the thing said no spike. So I wrote about that yesterday, but I've never seen that circle. So I don't know if I don't
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, yeah, I don't. That was my one. And the other one I wanted to share is that I had signed up to do the Dexcom trial thing with you. And so my life's been really busy. So Levels got a really long email from me yesterday. It was like I just dumped everything in there. But the Dexcom data is all over the place. It's like 20, 30 points difference. And after 20 days of it, I was like, can I just go back to my Libre? Because it was just so very, and then, it kind of drove me crazy because then I kept poking my finger going, what am I doing? But it wasn't me, it was the thing. So in my note last night, the very long note, I was like, okay, so I have another Dexcom should I put it somewhere else? Not quite sure what to do. But I guess my question really for you is, because I wanted to be part of this trial and I guess I took myself out. Do I put myself back in if I put the Dexcom on, or?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a way that you can withdraw from the trial online. Is that what you're talking about?
I don't want to do that. And I didn't think about that when I asked to go back to the Libre. I was just uncomfortable is not the right word. I was just annoyed that my numbers were always over when they're never
Sure.
all over the place, right? I have some things, and I even put one, I'll forward the email to you, or even like the numbers are like this from the Dexcom. And I'm like,
Sure.
it was the morning, what was going on, you know? So that's just a FYI for you that was my experience. But I'm really interested about this circle thing because I was kind of poo-pooing your whole spike thing in my email because I'm like, what does that do for me? I don't
Got
have,
it.
but I like the circle. That's really interesting. I like that. I've never seen that before.
Yeah, it may be that you have an older version of the app then. So maybe let's talk about those two things. First, if you have the most recent version of the app, it should look like this. I don't know if it's able to.
Yeah, no, I don't have that.
Okay, so it may just mean that you need to get a newer, download a newer version of the app.
Okay.
Now I have the beta app, so it has even more features, but Sissy, I'm pretty sure the general app also has the ring now, right?
Yes, and if you go to the profile photo, there should be a way to turn on stability ring. So for anyone else on the call who isn't seeing the stability ring, head to the profile page and then scroll down. We have a section that says try the new dashboard, which I think at this point most folks are opted into, and then try the new stability score.
There we go.
And let me just show you.
I have the new stability score.
You have that checked off.
Yeah, I have that checked off.
It might just be the need to have to reset your app. So trying to re-download it might work. But you should then see, if you have that checked off, you should see the new stability ring. That image is the stability ring. And feel free to ping us offline, and I'll make sure that we get that fixed for you.
That's really cool. I like that. So now I should take back my words I said last night. Yeah. Okay.
Well,
thank you for that.
Sure. And then second, on the trial, yeah, we have had some people write into us with different experiences with Dexcom. And we have seen some people that have more variability there. If you actually can switch now, I can't comment on, the cost of this, but you can switch back to the Libre and stay in the study. So if you switch back to the Libre, unless you explicitly withdraw from the study, you're actually still in it.
Okay.
You don't have to use the Dexcom device just to be in the study.
Okay. Okay. Well, what I'm going to do, I've just had I'm 6 days on ending the Libre. And so I'll give the Dexcom another shot. And if not, I have another Libre and I'll just stick to that.
Great.
Yeah. All right, cool. Thank you. I'm looking forward to the circle thing.
Nice. Yeah. Hopefully let us know if you're not able to find it.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you.
In terms of next questions, why don't we have Veronica jump up? Dina, if you want to get some more clarification on the sensor reaction to heat, and then Brock. Oh, Veronica, I think you're on mute.
I'm new to levels. I'm on my second sensor, so I haven't even had 20 full days yet. But I'm seeing a lot of multi spikes after one meal. And I saw the article on biphasic spikes, but I'm seeing in some meals that aren't particularly carb heavy, 3, sometimes even 4 spikes. I have a Dexcom and I haven't calibrated it. I don't know if that has anything to do with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. Some people do have multiple spikes after a meal, so things can get wobbly, if you will, for a little while. Certainly calibration wouldn't hurt there. You might just try it and see if it does improve things. But it also wouldn't be out of the ordinary to have multiple spikes. A biphasic spike there's a real, like a physiological reason why you have that. We're still learning about multiphasic spikes, how often they occur, what they mean, that sort of thing. So we don't know a lot about those yet, unfortunately.
Okay, thanks.
Dina, if you have additional questions on your question about spiking with heat, feel free to jump up. Otherwise, we can go to Brock.
Yeah, I just was wondering if the spike that I have after I get out of a hot bath is due to the sensor just, not dealing with it correctly, or if it's stress on my body of the heat, which shoots my glucose up.
That's a great question. This is another one of those areas that we're going to have to learn more about, but it would not be impossible that the heat itself is causing your body to release more glucose. And we do see with hot cold cycles that people go through that there can be changes in interstitial glucose. So it may not be the sensor. I don't know off the top of my head what each of the sensors has a certain operating range, and that's in the Abbott or the Dexcom literature. So you want to make sure that you are keeping that your bath temperature isn't over that operating range. But I think what you may be seeing is actually real. The interstitial glucose may be rising after a bath.
Okay, I did notice one time when I got out of my sauna, I did a manual check of it, and it said it was too hot for the sensor, so I don't even check it anymore. But I can't take it on and off when I'm getting in the sauna, so.
Yeah, I see. So sorry, can you say that one more time? You did a manual check?
One time when I got out of the sauna, I just held my phone up there to check it, and it said something about sensor too hot to operate or something like that. So I just I've never done that before. I still go in with it. I just don't try to check it after. I haven't seen huge spikes on my day, the record of the day when I come out of the sauna. I just noticed it pretty much every night when I take a hot bath and I check it before I'm charging my phone for the night. And it'll be up in the 120s, high 120s sometimes. And I haven't eaten for 3 hours or something like that. So I was just wondering.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, I think there are multiple things happening there, right? If you are going outside the operating range for the sensor, that can make it less likely to be accurate. So
okay. I'll read that article that was sent to me. Thank you.
One other hack I know some members do because they don't want it to impact their score is if you mark that as a strenuous activity, that will discount that activity, which I know is not like the most convenient thing, but oftentimes people who really want to monitor their score and want to make sure that the hot baths and saunas that they're taking don't impact their stability ring, they will typically go in and mark that as an exercise because as long as they haven't eaten 2 hours before or 2 hours after, and they're sure that it's because of that shower, they'll just mark it as an activity and a strenuous activity. So in case that helps, but it's very, I think, based on if you've consumed food before.
I'll try that. Thanks.
You got it. Brock, why don't we have you jump up?
Hey, can you hear me?
yeah.
All right.
Hey.
Thank you. First off, Levels, for doing this. I find it fascinating. My first CGM would have been back in July, so I wore it for a month, and I actually just put it on my website so that you have a visual. But my biggest question is, I'm an athlete. I'm an older athlete, so I just turned 33, and I've just noticed the more I eat, the better I feel. And if I pay less attention to my glucose readings and more attention to like my gut, I just do better. I have tracked like pretty detailed, like everything I eat, how often I eat, like the regimens. And I've just noticed that I tend to have really large spikes throughout the day, but just as fast as it spikes up, it goes down. And I'm really curious, like if there's any research that's being done around not only measuring like how long, what did you give as the range, Taylor? Was it like a 30 milligram spike? Is that considered like out of range?
Yeah, 30 milligrams off your baseline. Yeah.
So if you look at that versus how long are you like above your baseline versus like at baseline? Because for me, it seems like my body is very sensitive toward
Mhm.
what I eat. And so I like get these quick hits of energy, but then I like come down. And I'm just wondering like, I plan to like put a CGM on this month and get back into looking more at the data. But as an athlete, are there a lot of asterisk marks around like high intensity training? I mean, I'm doing like sprinting, jumping,
Mhm.
running, all of that.
Sure. Yeah, no, there's a bunch to unpack there. I think certainly because we're at the beginning of really understanding this, it's only a partial quantitative game, right? I think, we have this concept of interoception, basically understanding how you feel about yourself, right? How you feel, your what you call your gut feeling. And the continuous glucose monitor is really supposed to enhance that, not necessarily replace that, if you know what I mean. So I don't think that a CGM should be, well, at least the way that I use it, it's not something that would replace how I'm feeling or like how I act based on how I feel. It just helps augment it. If I find that I'm spiking for, large amounts for long periods of time, the foods that might be associated with that are things that I might change, right? But, I don't think that we understand enough now to say, count your calories, make sure you don't go above X ever. It's not that level of prescription right now.
Okay.
The other thing that we're looking into actually is, we've started talking about a glucose drop with aerobic training. You also see a glucose spike typically with anaerobic training. Because you're recruiting those muscles for things like strength training or interval training, when you're doing, really fast or strenuous workouts, your blood and interstitial glucose levels actually can go up. Like for me, my glucose levels will go up to 170 or 200 with a CrossFit workout. And
Wow.
we're trying to learn more about how we can help folks using the CGM who are athletes and trying to optimize their performance. And there may be something there, but we don't really know yet. I mean, I think it's too early.
Okay. Well, sign me up for any studies if you have high intensity athletes. But like I said, research is awesome. And just a fun fact, when I first wore my CGM, the first food that I ate was a Chipotle burrito. It was like my last day at my current job. And I just put it on the website too, but I got a rating of 1. It spiked my blood like 65 milligrams.
Oh,
And I
wow.
was like, oh my gosh. So really appreciate all that you've done. And thank you for doing this.
Thank you. Thanks for joining and for your comments.
All right, it looks like we don't have any other questions. Does anyone else have anything before? Taylor, I don't know if you want to jump into a high level overview of the future of research, or yeah, we can
Sure.
move a second for questions.
I have
Yeah.
a quick question. Hi, my name is Kate. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. I've been using levels, I guess, just a couple of times this year. It's really expensive, and I'm struggling to afford the cost of it. I have one sensor left that I've been like hoarding. I haven't used it yet because I had some injuries and I needed an MRI, so I didn't want to put my sensor on and then be told, oh, you got to remove that for your MRI. So I didn't want to waste it. So I've been like hoarding it, just waiting for all my injury stuff to be over with. But I was just wondering if the cost is ever going to go down to make it a little bit more affordable for people.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think we're looking at multiple ways that we can do that over time. As with many new services, they start being more expensive, and as we figure out how to make them more generally available, the cost will come down. A lot of the cost of the current service is actually related to the cost of the continuous glucose monitors. And those are not something that's not something that Levels controls. That's the manufacturers of those glucose devices. But both of the companies, Abbott and Dexcom, as well as Medtronic, that produce these glucose monitors, I think are committed to making them more affordable over time. So that will be really partially on their time scale. And then certainly Levels is working to make our services more generally available. And that could be, today it's only available to consumers directly. That was, the best way that we could make it available to everybody. But over time, we could see ourselves working with clinicians and not pharma companies, but insurance companies and payers to make this more generally available.
Okay, thank you. I had one more like really weird random question, but I'm a bodybuilder and I take this one like pre-workout product called Ignition. It's basically just powdered glucose. And the intent is obviously to give energy for the workout and also to help spike insulin to, target mTOR to get it to start, creating new muscle tissue. I was wondering, like, I notice when I take it, like sometimes it'll spike like within, I don't know, like a minute or two of me just ingesting this stuff. And then other times it takes like a lot longer, and I'm not taking anything else with it really, maybe a little bit of protein powder, but I was just wondering if you had any like general advice for people who are weightlifters who are using a glucose product like that for the purposes of, their workout and muscle building, like when you should start your workout based on the feedback you're getting from the CGM.
Yeah, no, we definitely don't understand that well enough yet. We also, I think, are not specialized enough to really be able to help in that particular area. One of the things that we are seeing now is that there seems to be, so for folks who actually eat a lower carbohydrate diet versus a higher carbohydrate diet, i.e. like not using things like glucose, they can still achieve the same athletic performance. This is more for runners and we haven't done this with strength training or with anaerobic workouts yet, but we are seeing that people don't necessarily need to have a high level of carbohydrates to achieve a high level of performance. So that might be something to keep in mind. And certainly as we start to work with more athletes that are doing high intensity type training and anaerobic training, we'll share more information, but we don't really know enough yet to comment on what you're talking about.
Okay, thank you. No worries.
Kate, we have a couple features on the blog sometimes for folks who have used Levels for different type of athletic performance, trying to optimize, whether it be bodybuilding or going on like ultra marathon runs. So I can share the link to our blog, but oftentimes we'll feature folks, and those are just like very small case studies, like N of 1, but it might help you better understand how other people are fueling and managing things like pre-workout. James had a question about how we choose effectively which CGMs to support. Taylor, I don't know if you want to comment on that briefly.
Sure. Well,
I'm sorry. This is
yeah.
James. To clarify it, I know both Dexcom and Libre have new versions that are coming out. In fact, I think Dexcom just announced today or something like that. So I was just wondering if those will be supported.
Yeah, so we are definitely working with both companies to be able to support newer versions of the product over time. There will be a little bit of lag in our ability to integrate with them, but they're definitely on a roadmap, and we're working with those companies to be able to offer newer versions over time.
Thanks.
All right, it looks like we are at time. Taylor, do you have anything that any final words you want to share with the group before we close out?
I think this has been great. Really appreciate all of you coming, and yeah, looking forward to more questions in the future. Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone. We will send out the replay via email, as well as links that Stadi and I have been dropping in the chat, and we'll have a feedback survey. So please share your feedback, and we look forward to hosting more of these. Thanks for joining.